What's up, folks? Welcome back to the Whoop Podcast, where we sit down with the best of the best, where we're on a mission to unlock human performance. I'm your host, Will Ahmed, founder and CEO of Whoop. On this week's podcast, Whoop VP of Performance Science, our principal scientist, Kristen Holmes, is joined by former U.S. Navy SEAL officer Mike Sarraille. After 20 years of service, including 10 combat deployments, Mike began to focus his energy on leadership and human performance. He was a member of the 777 expedition, which is a record-breaking skydiving journey, completed 7 skydives across 7 continents in 7 days. Take a second to think about that. 7 skydives across 7 continents in 7 days. That's insane. Mike and 8 other former U.S. and Canadian service members all wore Whoop throughout the expedition and compiled some incredible data. Kristen and Mike discuss Mike's military service career and his transition out of the service, how Mike has used his military experience in his new life as a mentor and leadership coach. It's all about creating a culture of high performance and accountability, according to Mike. The Legacy Expedition Program and the 777 campaign. The 777 team's Whoop data. They get into lack of sleep, HRV, and how their metrics compared to the baseline. And how to develop a strong mental mindset. I think this is a really key piece of the podcast. Keep in mind, this is a world record accomplishment. And so you're going to hear a lot from Mike about mindset. If you're interested in Whoop, we are now offering a 30-day free trial of the platform. You get a Whoop in the mail, our latest Whoop 4.0 in the mail, and you get to decide after 30 days whether you want to become a member. It's literally a free trial, so that's at whoop.com. If you have a question you want to see answered on the podcast, email us, podcast@whoop.com, or call us, 508-443-4952. Here are Kristen Holmes and Mike Sarraille.
I'm super excited for this discussion. We're going to talk about Folds of Honor and the world record-breaking 777 expedition. We've got some super cool data that I'm really eager for you to help contextualize. And I'd also love to chat a little bit about one of your recent articles that highlighted some super interesting research about aging and mindset. So I thought that would be really fun to talk about and just, given your vast experience in the field of human performance, kind of just your thoughts on that specific research and just the mindset in general. And so excited for a little deep dive around that.
Let me qualify that. My anecdotal, non-empirical data experience in human performance.
Hey, well, you have thousands of repetitions, and that absolutely counts for something. And just to kind of set this up, for our listeners, like you're a decorated veteran with 20 years of service, 10 combat deployments, and you have, as I just mentioned, an incomprehensible number of repetitions, pushing the limits of human performance. So first of all, thank you for your service. And secondly, thank you for using your wealth of knowledge and experience to teach others about leadership and human flourishing. I know that it's, often difficult for folks who transition from special operations in particular to replicate the purpose that is felt during that time serving. And, as a place to start, I'd love to hear your perspective on your time in the military and what that transition period separating from the military really looked like for you.
Well, first off, thank you for paying your taxes and paying my salary and the $100,000 worth of mountaineering and combat equipment I walked away with. So thank you.
My pleasure.
Certainly, I'll tell you this. I didn't come from a military lineage, and the power that people don't realize they hold when they're part of an organization and there's a sense of pride of being part of that organization. When you step outside your office building or work, you represent your organization. For me, as a 18, 19-year-old, I met a Force Recon Marine, Staff Sergeant Ben Post, and the guy was a Force Recon Marine. I mean, I think like 5'10", just built. And again, I'm 18, like 135 pounds, soaking wet. And the guy was just nice. He was around all these other Marines who were just, quite frankly, dicks and rude and arrogant to people. And then the one badass amongst the 15 Marines, and they all knew it, was this guy who's got the dual cool Force Recon humbly confident, kind, respectful, empathetic. And I'm just like, dude, whatever organization, whatever you do, I want in. And college didn't work out. And he gave me some great guidance to help guide me. I enlisted in the Marine Corps with a recon guarantee, made it through the recon training, became a recon Marine, a scout sniper. Funny enough, I went to scout sniper. And remember, I come from the Bay Area, California, which is not exactly a hotbed of recruiting, and nor like are we big gun people. So I never really fired a gun before I joined the military. And then within 1 year of the Marine Corps, I'm in sniper school, and made it through sniper school by the skin of my teeth. Not the shooting part, that was easy. It was the stalking part. But the Marine Corps laid the foundation for me to be successful. I graduated high school with a 2.9. And after a couple of years in the Marine Corps, they're like, hey, you're doing a good job. Do you want to become an officer? And this was pre 9/11. I'm like, I looked at my peers and they're like, go, dude, go. And graduated Texas A&M with like a 3.65. I guarantee I didn't get smarter during those 5 years. I learned about honor, discipline, self-accountability, and I should say self-discipline, commitment, focus, pride. And, the next step for me was the SEAL teams, because the war had kicked off while I was a MECEP stationed at Texas A&M, and made it through the SEAL training. Remember, I'd been through some very tough training in the Marine Corps before I even got to Buds. Quitting wasn't an option because I was very much still representing the Marine Corps. Made it to SEAL Team 3, did 3 combat deployments. 2 of those were won the Battle of Ramadi in 06, which was popularized by Extreme Ownership and Jocko Willink. And then, the Battle of Sadr City in 08, and then made it to Naval Special Warfare Development Group, which is a very elite talent pool within an elite talent pool. And when I got there, every day was a battle to make sure that I was staying at the bar, the standard they had set, or a little bit above. And I think that's why I only lasted 6 years there, because I was just wore out
Only
by the end.
Only 6 years. Yeah.
You said 10 combat deployments. It's not rare for guys there to have 15 combat deployments. One of my buddies had 22 combat deployments. And I'm just like, God damn, dude. These guys, and I'm in the public, but for every one of me, there's like 50 badasses that the public will never know about that would be like, Sarraille, shut up.
Yeah.
They are, I was in awe of the men and women I served alongside, especially in the tier 1 community. They're the most lethal warriors in the world. And that's not a subjective statement. That's an objective statement. That's fact. To give you an example, 1 out of 40 SEALs makes it to the tier 1 level. And to get into the SEAL teams, it already has a 75 to 90% attrition rate. And what people get wrong about these lethal warriors is they're kind, they're respectful, they're empathetic, and they're just good human beings, man. They do a dirty job. They know why they're doing it. And it is a tribe. And so when you talk about transitioning out, I ended up one of the first elements into Iraq when the whole ISIS thing kicked off. I was actually with our Army Tier 1 component on an exchange tour doing a troop commander over there. And we had no authorities to do anything while the Yazidi people were being massacred by ISIS on a mountain. People in Mosul were being massacred. And we're like, put us in. And nope. And for me, my fun meter was just pegged. I felt like we were fighting with 2 hands behind our backs. Yeah. And then all of a sudden I end up in Austin, Texas by myself. And it was just 2 years of, while I was in the MBA program, when I left the house, I put a veneer on with a smile. And then when I got back to the house, it was just a spiral every night. Because one, if I think special operations guys, for the most part, suffer from a form of post-traumatic stress called survivor's guilt. And I know you know Dr. Chris Free. I think you do.
Yeah. Operator syndrome. Yeah, has done some just incredible work on really dissecting what that actually looks like.
Somebody connected me. Well, somebody pulled me in, a former senior officer who's already retired, happened to live in Austin as well. And he's like, what the hell are you doing, dude? And they put me in contact with Chris Freed. For like 2 years, he talked to me on the phone for an hour every day. Jeez. That's how much that man gives to others. You talk about selflessness. He puts a different definition on that term.
Yeah, he's
And
an
he
exceptional
taught me a
human.
lot about, you see the sign in the back says everyday warrior.
Yeah.
And I struggled with the fact that I lost my tribe. That was a big part of my DNA. And we were traditional warriors, or warriors in the traditional sense. And, he heard me talk about how the biggest warrior I knew in my life was my mom. That woman, uh, she was only like 5'1", Italian, uh, is a warrior to the core, and the only person to ever break my nose or cause it to bleed massively, and I deserved it. But he's like, hey, you talk about this everyday warrior and your mom, and he's like, why aren't you that? And it really brought it home. And then I met a good woman who became my wife. So Chris and her really helped me out of a dark hole. And you need help from time to time. That's okay. It doesn't make you less masculine or less mentally tough. We all need help from time to time. And the worst thing you can do is continue to internalize that rather than doing the bravest thing, morally courageous thing, just saying, hey, I think I need to talk to somebody. I need a little help. And that was the period in my life that I needed help. And so now I'm trying to give others that help where I can. But
And Mike,
yeah.
what did that spiral actually look like for you?
Oh God.
Well, I think it's, part of it is recognizing it in others so you can, I think sometimes it's really hard for people to get help, right? And I think, as family members and loved ones, how to identify when someone is really struggling. I mean, you probably rocked up to class every day, Mike, with a smile on your face, like everything's fine, like you're just, and then you go home and what happens when you go home? And how does someone how do we know when to to really encourage someone to get help?
So when I left Virginia Beach and I still had 2 years to my retirement, they stationed me at the University of Texas Naval ROTC Center where I was really getting my MBA.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm still active duty. Probably had the longest beard in my career. They called me in for piss tests, urine tests, drug tests at the command. And I'd come in with a big beard. I'd do my urine test and they'd be like, okay, you can leave now because they didn't want me around the students. But it really was. So when I arrived, I hadn't drinking. I didn't really drink alcohol for like 2 years. I was in the best shape, and this is funny. I was in the best physical shape of my life, but I was emotionally, mentally, and spiritually bereft. Mm. And I was just angry. Everyone was an enemy. All the guys wanted to do was go forward and just eliminate bad people from the earth. And we didn't feel like we could do that. And so there was a lot of angst towards, the government, a lot of survivor's guilt. And then I started drinking heavily, which then led to, I'm going through a divorce at the time. I'm fighting out in town, which is embarrassing for a lieutenant commander. And doing other things that were self-mutilating in a way. And then, I woke up on a sidewalk after a fight because two guys were in front of me. Apparently there was a friend behind me. I didn't have my hearing aids in, didn't hear him coming. Sank me right into a sleeper hold, but laid my head down. And I woke up with two buddies looking down at me. And I guess the first words out of my mouth were, did I just get choked out? And they were like, yeah. I'm like, help me up. And it's right around that time that I started talking to Chris. I'm like, hey, this is unsustainable. One, I'm putting my career and my retirement in jeopardy. And Kristen, this is the low point for me. I'm embarrassed to even say that I didn't have the maturity and wisdom to not do this, but it was what I needed to go through to really wake up and say, hey, you got to start living for something else. And you're still a warrior. Warrior's about a mindset, not about carrying a gun. And hey, you do have a job, and that's to live in honor of the guys that didn't come home. And right now, you're not doing that. And it's there's ups and downs, there's ebbs and flows. That's life. And I focused more on mental and spiritual fitness over the last few years than I have physical. Clearly.
Yeah. I just interviewed a gentleman named Dr. Guy Winch, and he was saying how much folks spend on programming their exercise and thinking about what lifts they're going to do and how far they're going to run, but don't actually spend really any amount of time thinking about their mental, physical, and spiritual health. And I think we'd probably be a lot better off as a society if there was a more commensurate, more of a balance between those two things. But yeah, I think that, I mean, as you're talking, I think about the parallels, for folks who are transitioning from other things in their life, whether they're an Olympic athlete or a collegiate athlete, and now they're finished. There's these transition periods for everyone. And I guess, like, I think the magic of what you've been able to do, Mike, is take this really kind of extreme, like, amplified moment in your life and use that experience to help others understand what these transition periods can look like, and how to use those transition moments for good. And so I guess I'd love to hear just, how do you take this career, the highs and the lows, and translate it to folks? Like, you're giving a keynote, for example, to a Fortune 500 company, which you do frequently. What does that message, really look like?
It's funny you talk about other professions. I was just on a Zoom with a guy named Mark Pattison, NFL player, played for the Saints, the Raiders wide receiver. And, there's a lot of parallels. Those guys play until they're 30, and all of a sudden part of their DNA is it's gone.
Yeah, just
And so he got into climbing mountains, and he did all 7 summits on 7 continents. And he also won a Emmy for videography when he climbed Everest. So, one, I would say this: the military taught us how to live a good life, how to be disciplined, how to be accountable, how to maintain standards. And then for some reason, we just forget it the second we take the uniform off. But do hard things. America has stopped doing hard things and promoting hard things. Climbing mountains. Sir Edmund Hillary said it. You don't conquer the mountain, you conquer yourself. When we push ourselves outside mental and physical, our mental and physical limits, that's where true learning and growth take place. That's why Whoop. That's what you're monitoring. Wait, is my heart rate high enough? Am I out of, my resting heart rate? Good. Mentally, am I pushing myself? Yes. So, God, there's a speech by JFK at Rice University in 1962. They call it the Going to the Moon. And he basically said, we will be going to the moon, not because it's easy, because it's hard. And we had it in the trailer video for 777.
Yeah.
And guys, sometimes you do hard things just to do it, just to remind yourself that you are capable, to get yourself out of a rut. But when I speak to companies, I'm going to tell you this: the best leaders I've ever served for are in the military. Unfortunately, some of the worst leaders I've ever served for are also in the military. But it is the only organization that has a formal leadership development program, which is a progressive and sequential series of training events, coaching, mentoring, and experiential events. You can't teach leadership in the classroom. And the military is great about this. And then additionally, they push authority after you're trained to the standard. They push authority down to the lowest levels so that you feel empowered. And we do put servant leadership first and foremost, which basically people ask to summarize that. I say it's we before me. It's we before me. And then lastly, what I talk about is, people use the word transformational leadership a lot. And I say, okay, could you define that for me? And you never really get a good answer. And I'm like, well, let me boil it down to you. Transformational leadership is turning the compliant. That means if I work for Kristen, she is the VP of, remind me, it's the VP of
Performance science.
Performance science. I'm the VP of performance science. You work for me, you will do as I said. Guess what? That produces the bare minimum results, because you leave the room and I'm like, screw that, lady. I'm going to do the bare minimum. Here you go, ma'am. I'm not going to go further. I'm not going to take further effort to better the organization. But if you can turn the compliant to the willing, somebody who follows Kristen for who she is and what she stands for, know that she cares, because people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Mm-hmm.
And especially, I know you care when you hold me accountable. Say, hey, Mike, this is below the standard of what we accept here. And you've turned me into the willing. And usually it's, hey, Kristen, you're leaving Whoop. Where are you going? I want to come work for you. That's transformational leadership. And so I talk about leadership. I reframe how people think the military lead, because their perceptions are based off of Hollywood. We are now the 1% that serve. And I shock them. I'm like, hey, how do you guys really think we led in the military? And I'll open it up like, hey, well, you just tell people what to do. It's the culture, and they'll go do it. I'm like, bare minimum results. Yes, that is true. At the end of the day, I'm an officer. I can order my men to go do something. But in the SEAL community, if it's a dumb order, they'll be like, yeah, we're not doing that, Mike. We're not charging up the hill. We can go around and attack from the back. And they'll override me. That's the beauty of the special operations community, which is distinct from the conventional military. But I tell them, no, we lead through love. And I love my men, and it took me a lot of reflection, a lot more than I hated the enemy. I love my men and women a lot more. Now, there's a difference between like and love. I loved all my men and women. Did I like them all? Hell no. And not all of them like me, and that's fine. We still had the professionalism to come together on Monday, get the order of what the objective was for that week, what success looked like. We'd work together as a team, secure mission success. And then come Friday, we went our separate ways, never shall the two pass meet on Saturday or Sunday, and we do it all again the next week. But for those that have parents, this may bring it home. The highest form of compassion is accountability. Kristen, I know you have kids. If you see your son or daughter do something wrong, you step in, and hopefully you do it with professionalism and tact, and using the Socratic method. Like, and I know sometimes it's like, hey, Caden, what the hell were you thinking there? And he's like, oh, this. I'm like, so how did you think that was going to end up? And you help them sort of critical thinking, come to the conclusion that they took the wrong actions, and that's unacceptable. Accountability and standards are missing in today's business world and society. We have to hold a high standard. And all you see is like people just lowering standards. What, in Oregon, they just passed that you don't have to pass math or reading. You'll still get your high school diploma. What message is that sent? You either incentivize behaviors or you disincentivize behaviors. And we have to hold our people accountable. Don't talk to them like they're children. But if you set the standard up front with an organization, when people come on and say, hey, we use this method called accountability, and we have tough conversations, and we'll address something if we see you doing it wrong. And it's not we're attacking your character. It's we want you to be the very best performer. We want you to maintain the standards. Because if we allow those standards to come down, well, what you accept in your presence becomes the standard. And so that really brings it home. And, I was held accountable in the military by great leaders who cared about me. At the end of the day, for the kids, much like our employees, you want your kids to become competent, good, human beings that contribute to society. But more importantly, have the ability, because you're not going to be there all the time, to stand on their own 2 feet and to be able to have the critical thinking to learn and grow in your absence. It's no different than my company. My job as a SEAL officer was to train the next generation to be better than we were, to keep the organization accelerating. And the SEALs today, even though some of my generation will disagree, are better than we were. They're smarter, they're stronger, they're faster, they're more capable. They just haven't had their moment yet. But when they do, they will rise to the occasion. We just saw in the Sudan, they just near flawlessly just pulled out all the non-combatant combatants out of there, all the Americans out of the embassy. And everyone came home. So I think that's a testament to today's force. But man, I love leadership. I love leadership development and culture. And it is a passion, and I love working with private sector companies. But the way to do leadership development is not a keynote. It's not in the classroom. It's actually experiential leadership development, where we have something called Into the Wild Extreme, where we get companies out in the woods. And yes, it's
doing hard things.
Field training. It's experiential. People see each other's weaknesses and strengths. They're vulnerable. Everyone's pushed out outside their mental and physical comfort zones. And that's where this concept of shared adversity, this sense of homecoming and belonging, are truly forged. Because people will talk about that trip for years and decades into the future.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think you hit on a bulk of my career has been, studying high performance models and operating in high performance models. And there's no question that accountability precedes culture. Like if you don't have accountability, you have nothing. And I think great teams are, I think the question that always comes back, how do you inspire a level of accountability necessary to sustain excellence? And that's kind of I think what you're getting at, is that there's an infrastructure that is required in order, to create a culture that is really high performing. And yeah, so what are the components of that?
So when I talk and when I start really honing down into leadership and culture, is I say, hey, let's boil this down. One, we did a poll on LinkedIn of define what it means to lead, and you'd be shocked how many people said to manipulate others to your will. I'm like, whoa! I'm like, does anyone here want to manipulate others? If you do, I'm going to put you in the narcissistic, sociopathic realm. No, I want to inspire and influence. And how do
Yes.
you do that? You do it through behavior. I had a
Mm-hmm.
Marine Corps colonel when I was young in my career. The Marine Corps has 11 leadership principles. The Army, Navy, and Air Force pretty much have the
Mm-hmm.
same ones. He said, if you forget all of them, just remember this one, the golden rule. He said, lead by example,
Mm-hmm.
which if you want to look at industrial organizational psychology, they call that behavioral modeling or observational learning. Again, when you go back to your kids, it's no different. There was a
Mm-hmm.
1987 Don't Do Drugs commercial where a father comes into a room, the son's on the bed with microphones on his ears or those big old earphones.
Mm-hmm.
And in the box, cigar box is marijuana. He says, where'd you learn to do this? The son dodges the question. He asks again more harshly, and the son looks at him and says, I learned it from watching you, Dad. I learned it from watching you.
Yeah.
Parents who do drugs have kids that do drugs.
Mm-hmm.
So as a leader, it comes down to behavior. People will be what people can see.
Mm-hmm.
And so as you're trying to create that culture, you're trying to create that culture of accountability and standards, you have to lead by example. And if you do that, ultimately you start to shape the culture you want. So if leadership is about behavior, what is culture? It's behavior at scale. And it's not when the VP of human performance is in the room. It's when she leaves and her 5 people continue to work. What behaviors do they demonstrate when their leader's not around? And so, yeah, I love talking about behavior. And then ultimately, again, how do you incentivize behavior and how do you disincentivize others?
Right. I love that. Yeah. I love the behavior as kind of the scaffolding, because you kind of are what you do. And I think where I see some leadership programs kind of go wrong is, I definitely believe that there is a pretty well understood uh, taxonomy of the physiological behaviors that enable you to lead, right? Like I think in order to, and that's where I feel like we don't necessarily spend enough time. We kind of dive right into culture and leadership without actually talking about what behaviors help facilitate leadership. How do you actually create psychological safety in a room? Well, don't show up sleep deprived, number one, right? Like, understanding the connection between your physiological behaviors and how you manage your psychology is everything. It's like we tiptoe around that in organizations, and it drives me insane.
So I wish, and this is like, again, you look at Stephen Kotler, you
Mm,
look at Simon Sinek, you look at Dan Coyle, who wrote the Culture Code.
mm,
They all went to special operations units, and like you said, you love studying these high performance models or cultures. And human performance is baked into all of that. How do we get how do we optimize the physiological and psychological component of performance?
mm.
That is, I mean, besides like companies like Johnson and Johnson, you rarely see that in
Yeah,
companies.
this doesn't happen.
And here, and Kristen, I'm like, this is not turning political, but you want to know why? I think is because you'd run into a HR legal uh, component.
Firestorm.
Oh, that now you're getting into my physical health, but no, if you want to be your very best, you've got to be physically fit. One, what does that say about you? And again,
Mm,
I'm not fat shaming. We shouldn't even be talking about it. But are you getting sleep? What is your stress level? If you are stressed, how do we lower that? Because hey, here are the impacts of your high stress, your performance. That it's almost non-existent.
mm.
non-existent. And if you want to change behaviors, it starts there. With the Everyday Warrior, we talk about 3 pillars. And again, this was my journey, what I learned when I spiraled. Physical fitness, mental or emotional fitness, and spiritual fitness. But what is the building block to the other 2? What's the primary one? It's physical fitness. It's physical fitness. You do look at other cultures like Japan, they still implement certain practices in the morning where they do calisthenics together and they promote, physical wellness. Personally, I think we need to return to that, but there's a good segment of our population that would push back and say, I'm not doing that, and that's prejudicial.
Yeah. And I always, when I was coaching, I coached as a Vidwan head coach for 13 seasons. And I would always tell my athletes, like, if you want to have a great empire, rule over yourself. And I love, it's Roman slave Cyrus. And I love that quote because it just nothing, I think, sums it up better than that. Like, if you don't have control over what is going to move around your physiological and psychological capabilities, like, you have kind of nothing in my view. Like, I think I think that framework and kind of what those tenets are probably isn't pushed enough, to your point, because of all the firewalls that exist around what actually folks need to do in order to get the most from themselves.
People lose the strategic view of why we're here and why we're doing this. I'm going to be dead in 30, 40 years unless I don't die on a skydiving accident first. And if I do, I'm going to go out doing what I love. If we want to change the culture of this nation, what you do? It starts in kindergarten, in teaching them about attributes and values and principles, even in public education, and about human performance. And then increasing that knowledge and the depth at which we teach it all the way to 12th grade, to their senior year of high school. I mean, why aren't we talking about human performance beyond math and reading and science and all the rest in civics? And why aren't we teaching them how to maintain optimal performance for sustained periods of time? And same thing, you look at MBA programs, and I remember when I got to my MBA program at 39, they were calling me the old man amongst a bunch of 27-year-olds who were all smarter than me. I needed the help of a SEAL who had a father that was on the board of University of Texas to get me into the MBA program. I had to take the GMAT with 1 week notice, and it didn't go well. And that was the first test I had taken in like 13 years. And the dean of the school in an open forum said, hey, we produce leaders here in McCombs, and he talking about leaders. He kept talking, and I'm like, and so I pushed back against him, and I said, hey, sir, I'm going to push back against you on the whole producing leaders thing. We're here for 2 years. I've not heard about a leadership development curriculum or methodology whatsoever. And I said, I have no doubt you produce great business practitioners. I think that's proven. But I would be cautious to say you produce leaders. Yes, you select leaders into the program, but what do you do to refine those? And they really do nothing. So we lack, the education of the next best generation is the biggest deficit for our nation right now. And it may not change in our lifetime, but guess what? We can put things in place now that change it 30, 40 years from now. Yeah,
I love that. Yeah, I feel like it's definitely a call to action. I think about, I know you have kids too, and you think about, what are they learning in health class? What are they? But they aren't getting any of this information really. Just have they once been asked to kind of sit down and reflect on their values? Not on what their what are your parents' values? What would you say your parents' values are? I mean, that's a really interesting thought exercise, right? And then what are your values? And you can kind of see when I do this exercise with my kids, like, what they think I value and what they value actually is like quite different. And I say that's okay. Like, and that's part of like I think maturing and growing up is starting to understand like what it is that you care about. Right. And that's when you actually can tap that intrinsic motivation, because you start to understand what it is that you really value and what do you really care about. And you start to align your behaviors with those values. But, just that simple exercise doesn't really happen in any sort of organization in a meaningful way. And that's kind of the foundation, I think, of sustained levels of motivation and attentional capacity and effective effort and energy production. But yet we don't tap into that in
No,
any formal way.
at the time I didn't appreciate it. But I was always raised. We went to a Catholic grammar school. I went to a Jesuit high school, so spirituality was always sort of intertwined within the education. And I don't think I truly appreciated it until I ended up in Marine boot camp, crying like a little brat because my parents couldn't help me out and I was on my own. And that's when life started to get real, and I realized how important the spiritual aspect of life is. And spiritual is different for everyone. That doesn't have to mean religion. I think the reason we do what we do at Legacy Expeditions and get vets out into the wild is that I think nature is next to godliness. And for example, when I went to Nepal and went to the Khumbu region where we skydived in, I felt so small looking at the biggest mountain ranges in the world. I felt tiny, and I felt small in a good way. And it sort of made me smile. I'm like, you know what? I'm a drop in the bucket of history, and I'm going to be more. I need to do more. I need to inspire and influence more people. It was just awe-inspiring in a good way. People need to get out there. And the other thing too is, guess what? We didn't have any cell phone coverage whatsoever in the Everest region, and it was great just to disconnect. We're about to go. We just signed an agreement with a company called Highlander, where basically people just go out and hike anywhere from I think they've got 15 all the way to 60 miles. We're starting in Big Bear in May. We do Cowspell, Glacier National Park in the spring. But the guy who started is Serbian. He was a BMX professional, Red Bull team. And he's like, people just disconnect. People forge relationships that continue beyond the hikes. Yeah, there's a lot of positivity in just disconnecting, breathing, and then engaging with people without cell phones and just, again, listening.
I love that. I mean, maybe this is a good segue into Legacy Expeditions. Like, maybe just explain to our viewers and listeners, what was the impetus to kind of start Legacy Expeditions, and then we can kind of get into 777 Expedition.
Yeah. So a few years after I retired, I was in great shape, but my left hip was degrading. And I actually did a photo shoot for Men's Journal the week before I got the hip resurfacing, which is more intrusive than a hip replacement, because they cut off half the femur ball and they've got to go through the glute. So it has thank you, correct word. And it actually is a longer healing period because they cut through the glute to do this procedure, but it's called the young man's hip replacement. And I went, again, I was just like sitting on the couch. My joints started to hurt in my elbows and everything else. It threw me out of whack. Hip feels great. Realize now the next hip has to get replaced. But after about 6 months, I'm like, man, I miss doing what I did. I miss skydiving. And talked to a buddy who's like, hey, I'm taking a group to Mount Everest to skydive not onto Everest, into the highest drop zones in the world around it. And I'm like, bro, I'm in. How much? He told me the price, and I'm like, crap. And so went and got some sponsors and pulled it off in 9 months, almost 9 months to the day for my hip replacement. I'm jumping at like 22,000 feet on oxygen, and there's Mount Everest in the corner of my eye. And we got 6 jumps in. It was awesome. I did lie to my buddy. He's like, hey, you're current on skydiving. And I'm like, yeah, dude. He's like, when's the last time you jumped? I'm like, 3 months ago. And it had been like 5 months.
Oh,
but he did hold training. He did hold training in Colorado. Again, following the special operations planning model, buy down risk by making sure that everyone's trained to the standard.
Yeah.
And so I formed Legacy Expeditions then. And then around that time a few months before I left for Everest, I called a buddy named Nick Cush, real underperformer. I don't know why I didn't hang out with this guy.
I love Nick so much. He's such a good guy.
I've never met anyone more skilled at building.
I jumped with Nick. He was my partner.
So I was going to ask, you jumped with
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, we've become like just great friends. What?
He was very professional on the jump.
He
Didn't
was
pull
very
any
professional.
antics.
No. He was no antics. Yeah, very, very professional. Yeah, no, he was tremendous.
Yeah, and Nick has built a name for him in the skydiving industry, and he trains a lot of the special operations. And so I knew that. I served with Nick in the Battle of Ramadi, and I know he's now this world-class skydiver. And I call him and I say, "Hey, man," I call Andy Stump around this, at the same time. Good old Andy. I love that guy. He is one of the smartest dudes in the world. It pisses me off. He can pick up anything and become good at it very quickly. And
it's kind of like Batman.
Yeah.
Andy is like Batman.
He's a badass. So I said, hey guys, I know this concept has existed for years, for decades, and no one's pulled it off. Even the Crown Prince of Dubai tried it, and they never even got to execution. I said, 7 continents, 7 days, 7 skydives. And Andy's like, yeah, let's do it. And Nick, being in the industry, is like, let me think about it. He's like, this is a lot, this consumes lives. It's a lot to bite off. What if we fail? Mm-hmm. And he calls back a week later. He's like, okay, let's do it. 18 months of planning. Around that time, we reached out to you guys to monitor our performance. 18 months of it consumed my life. My other businesses started to sort of, they maintained,
suffer.
They weren't growing. And I had some great people in place, but I wasn't supporting them. Killing my wife because all she heard was 777. By the time, even 2 months before we did 777, she's like, I don't want to hear that word.
Oh, I could only imagine. Yeah.
And we raised the money to do it. We were never going to have a private 757, so we flew commercial economy. Mm-hmm. And there's a reason why. Optics-wise, you're not going to have 9 dudes on a 757 while we're trying to jump in honor of our fallen and raise money for folds of honor.
Of course,
and that was key. And so, again, we followed the special operations planning model. 2 training camps. You came to the second. Mm-hmm. Gave a brief on performance. Mm-hmm. We conducted 800 jumps amongst the 9 guys, mostly special operations veterans, that were going on the trip. And Kristen, there was still nights, even it was 1 month before we went. I wake up at 2:30 and my wife has to calm me down. I'm like, we're going to fail. We're imposters. Like this. She's like, you're fine. I'm like, no, this is going to fail. This is going to ruin my career because if I fail here, who wants to hear me speak? And
it's anxiety.
Yeah. And Nick and I launched early as what we call an Advon team. Mm-hmm. And we got to Punta Arenas first, greeted the team into Antarctica. And I have a question after I tell the tale of 777 about Antarctica. But Antarctica, we started there because that's the long pole in the tent, both logistically to get there and then weather-wise. Mm-hmm. So we were told, hey, sometimes there'll be no sky for 14 days. Mm-hmm. So we had the probability of we planned on jumping on January 9th. We may have not jumped until January 20th. And one person had to pull off the expedition because of that variable. We were blessed, jumped on the 9th, literally an hour and a half before we stepped onto the 757, flew to Santiago, Chile, jumped in South America, then on to Miami, where the NOTAM system, for the first time since 9/11, shut down. We landed at 6:30 a.m., turned on our phones, bloop, 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 bloop. All our flights are canceled. All civilian flights are canceled on that day.
Right. And you're going from Miami to Barcelona, so you had the narrowest window. I remember it being just
and this is what I love. This is what I love about high-performing teams, truly high-performing teams that are trained in adversity. First, guys are laughing. They're like, are you kidding me? Since 2001, this thing has never shut down. And on this day, this week,
we have a nationwide ground stop by the FAA.
So we knew we had to go jump in Miami to knock out North America. And so while we're in the cars, guys are like, okay, here's the problem. NOTAM is shut down. Civilian flights are canceled. What are viable options? We scoped the problem first, decided if it was a big enough problem. It was. And I think it was the Canadian, Glenn Cowan, who's like, hey, let's fly private, eh? And I pull up my phone. I'm like, yeah, let me USAA. But we came back to it. We're like, yeah, that's the only option. So all 9 of us, some other people started getting on the phones, and we didn't want to do this, but some good Americans stepped up and said, hey guys, we got you a jet from Miami to Barcelona. Amazing. And I remember it's the first time any of us have pretty much flown private. and it's a G5, I think it was. And the guys get on, they all take their seats, and of course, like, I put this whole thing together, and first off, I'm going to let Jim, the 73-year-old, get a seat first. And it's me and Mike Barker, the last two, and we end up on the bench. And like, I don't want to complain about being on a private flight, but I'm looking at Mike, and we're trying to sleep, and I'm like, Mike, just lay out on the bench, and I get on the ground. It was the worst flight I've ever, I was cold on the ground, like couldn't sleep, my hips throbbing. And we get to Barcelona, jump onto Cairo, where that photo went viral of us over the pyramids, onto Abu Dhabi, which unbeknownst to the guys, I didn't let them know until we actually jumped and landed. And I said, hey, everyone, after we landed, they brought all their parachutes over. I said, hey, listen up. There actually was a 6-continent record. And it was set in 8 days, something like 6 hours in like 30 minutes. I said, we just broke 2 world records, one, the sports skydiving in the tandem, 4 days, like something like 14 hours in 7 minutes.
I mean,
and you know the reaction? Guys were like, hey, okay. Like, let's go pack our chutes. Like, and that's what I was expecting. We make it to Perth, Australia. We jump in like 30-mile-an-hour winds. I land in the trees. 2 guys, the 2 most junior guys, were like 500 meters that way, 500 meters that way. Everyone was sort of in a group, and I was 6 feet from the edge of the drop zone and probably about 25 meters from the X. The winds were crazy. Andy's giving me shit, but we rally. We set 2 more records, again, the sports and the tandem for 7 continents, the first time ever done, in 6 days, 6 hours, and 6 minutes. And success was secured before we even left on that trip. We had, I don't have it here, but I had a 777 playbook with a logo, and it said the battle book, 777 battle book. And in really small print, it says, if this fails, it's Andy Stump's fault. But it had everything: contingencies, everyone's passports, the itineraries, flights, everything, numbers, points of contact. And again, I hate to do this. There was another group of what we call white soft guys that tried to do it as well. Mm-hmm. And, when we were planning for this, guys would come up and they'd be like, hey, why don't we do this when we're in Egypt? And we're like, hey, keep it simple.
Yeah.
This is something that no one's ever done. It's a logistical nightmare. It's transglobal transportation. And
so many uncontrollable variables. I mean, just weather and travel.
What we're doing, guys. Yeah. We go to Egypt, we jump, we get back on a plane and leave. That's the mission. We're not going to go look at the pyramids. We're not going to do this. This is the mission.
You're going to get the best view of the pyramids.
And we did. That was by far the best jump. We all thought.
That footage is just, we'll link to that footage in the show notes, because that is just the most epic view ever. It's just, amazing.
So this other group, like, God bless them, dude. I mean, like, for having the guts to try. But they're like, hey, we're going to shoot machine guns off of boats in Colombia, where we're going to jump. We're going to put like a crane next to London Bridge, and we're going to do this and this and this and this. And they didn't even make it to Antarctica. Again, we sort of saw, not the special operations, we followed the JSOC model. Andy and I came from JSOC plus a few others. And don't add complexity to something that is already complex. Mm-hmm. Don't do it. Keep the main thing the main thing. Yeah. Everything else is icing on the cake, but if that icing on the cake has the potential to ruin or detract you from achieving mission success, then eliminate it, no matter how sexy it may be. And
that's
so I
such a great principle for life. Too. So just to step back a second, just to explain Folds of Honor, because obviously this expedition was really to raise money for Folds of Honor. So just talk about how this expedition really amplified Folds of Honor and kind of shine the light on this charity, and just explain what it means to you, and just the success in terms of how much money we raised. It was pretty epic.
So Folds of Honor, one, there's so many veteran service organizations out there, and everyone's trying to do such good work. But for veterans, I think last I saw there was like 60,000 VSOs, veteran service organizations. That's too much noise. So we try to find organizations that, one, have a good core mission, their charter, and 2, put the majority of every dollar towards the actual programs. Folds puts 91 cents of every dollar towards their actual program scholarships. So that means they exist off of 9 cents for their operational costs, which is unheard of.
The industry standard is something like 30 cents, right? I mean, it's pretty abysmal, right?
So a testament to Larry Robinson, who was the man from Folds who really backed us on this, and Dan Rooney for establishing this. So they give educational scholarships to spouses and children of military veterans who either were killed in the war, highly disabled, and now first responders, which we love, because those first responders don't have many programs like we do as veterans.
Yeah.
And they're on the street every day dealing with the BS that we now see in the news. So God bless them. Their spouses and their kids are more than deserving of it. I do have a question for you. Were you guys collecting our data in Antarctica? Because we had
So,
or did you get a data dump once we got back to South America?
We have all the data. So I'm going to talk through it right now and kind of get your thoughts on just to provide some context. So, okay. So Antarctica to Australia with 5 jumps in between. All right. So to start, your recovery metrics and sleep metrics just degraded, as you can imagine, over the course of the expedition. And what was really interesting is that the total quality of sleep across all of the jumpers was an average of 4 hours and 25 minutes total. Like some folks get that in one night's sleep. Yeah. So that means
I thought you were going to say one night.
So this is across the 7 days. So that means you maybe one night had 20 minutes. One night, Glenn had 15 minutes. Nick had 30 minutes. Like your total quality sleep was only about 4 hours over the course of the entire trip. So just imagine like that level of light sleep. So the time that you did get to sleep was basically light sleep. So there really wasn't a lot of recovery and regeneration because we know the magic kind of happens during that deeper sleep, which you guys were really getting none over the course of this kind of 7 days, 8 days. And we saw, in addition to that, we saw, basically a degradation in your resting heart rate. So we're measuring that in the tiny moments that you have to sleep. We're kind of cherry picking your heart rate variability and your resting heart rate. And both of those were going, just your heart rate variability was just basically plummeting across the group, as well as resting heart rate. So your ability to recover was, you just weren't really able to recover. And I think what the crescendo here is like going into Perth, like when you look at your exertion, so your calories burned, which is a really nice proxy for exertion, you average, so your baseline, so when you're at home, your average caloric burn is about 2,000. Over the course of the kind of first 6 jumps, you were around 2,400, and then Perth you were 3,400. Yeah, so I'd be curious to know kind of. So I have a couple theories. So basically that time between Abu Dhabi and Perth, there was like the 15th, and then Perth was the 16th of January. The 15th, you're at 2,600, and then Perth is just wild, right? And I would imagine it's a combination of factors. You're super undercovered, so your body's working very inefficiently at this point. There's massive cognitive load, the stress of Perth, just in that the weather conditions, the wind, the anxiety of just wanting to kind of finish this thing, but then knowing this thing is going to be over. Like, tell me what was kind of going through the mind and maybe some details around Perth.
Okay, so let me actually step back to Antarctica.
Okay.
And I know we didn't get to implement this with what you call them, the blue blockers.
Yeah, so we were trying to do some chrono wear that was basically helping to kind of realign your circadian rhythms to just mitigate some of the deleterious effects that I'm talking about. But yeah, and I don't think the chrono wear actually got to you, right? So yeah.
No, and where I'm going with this is Antarctica really threw everyone off. So
the 24 hours of sunlight, right?
So you'd step out of your tent at 3 a.m. and it looks like it's 12 noon in Texas.
Yeah, that's so disorienting.
It's just sort of like, what the?
Yeah.
And you'd have to walk to the bathroom, which was like 150 yards, 200 yards away. And I know, like, oh, poor us. it reminded me of a deployment. So guys, like, their sleep schedule was off, and then like some guys were staying up until like 2, getting up. Everyone was off before we even started.
Yeah.
Now, we did have periods where we got like 6 hours in a hotel room, but here was what, and again, everything I'm saying is anecdotal.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, like 2 hours into the 6 hour period, I go down to the bar and order some food, and guess who was there? Almost everyone. They're like, "Yeah, I can't sleep."
Yeah.
And especially in the economy seat, I felt bad for Glenn, because Glenn is what? He's the biggest.
He's a huge.
He's 6'3",
so big, yeah.
and his shoulders are like probably another 5 inches. And you saw him like in the economy seat. He's like, and nobody was sleeping well in the economy seats. I don't think we were sleeping.
Yeah. Well, that was evident.
Yeah.
Very short sleep, very light sleep. Yeah.
So, I've been through sleep deprivation before, and it wasn't awful in the sense, I think I was just excited to be around the guys. We were excited because we were on track. We knew we were going to set things. And so everyone had a positive attitude, but you could see everyone with a cognitive decline, and sometimes just sort of like zombie, just walking in the direction they need to walk. But no one was complaining. Everyone had been through sleep deprivations because everyone's in special operations. But we got like 6 hours in Abu Dhabi. Nobody slept well. And then we actually got to Perth the evening before we were going to jump, and everyone got, and not a full night, probably like 6 hours, but everyone was exhausted in Perth. Yeah. I think additionally, we knew the winds were high, and maybe that spiked our adrenaline.
The stress,
stress. And then we really didn't get, at that point, everyone looked at me and they're like, "Hey, Mike, I'm not flying economy back from Australia to the US. That was the longest leg." And I'm like, "Hey, fellas, I get it. If you want to go first class or business class where you can get one of those layout things, I'm like, go for it." And actually, I had enough points on Delta. Everyone did it. I'm like, God damn it. And so I did it. And that's where Doc partially then passed out. I don't want to, it's the first time I'd ever taken it. It was a sleep pill, not Ambien, something else. And I took it and I was out for that 13-hour flight from Sydney to LA or whatever it is. Wow. And I woke up and I felt no real like after effects from it. I'm like, God, Doc, that stuff is magic.
Is that his sleep remedy?
It wasn't his sleep remedy. It was something, diazepam?
No. So it was a prescription. Okay.
Prescription.
Yeah.
But he wanted guys he wanted them out, and he knows it's not the best. I know Kirk is not a fan of, prescription sleep aids.
Yeah. And Kirk is a medical doctor for folks who are on the call.
Yes.
So
here's what I'll say. Yeah. Everyone powered through from January 1st to, what did we get home, like the 20th after New York? Because then we're doing the media circuit. We're drinking. Guys are having fun. But I started to, I couldn't concentrate. I was exhausted. I started to get sick. I get, like sick or like a cold, get better. And then 2 days later, it was another cold. And it took me, I think, a good 2 months, what I would consider to be, again, my anecdotal baseline of where I feel normal. It took 2 months.
Yeah. So, I talked to Nick right a few days after he got home, and he's like, "I'm really struggling." So we basically deployed a circadian alignment protocol, because that's what happens when, on a trip like this. It is just, when we think about, when we travel, we experience what's called this circadian disruption, right? And that's when you're viewing light at a phase of when you normally view light, light being the strongest kind of external cue that really tells every cell, organ, and tissue in your body like what it is to do. So when it's getting that out of sync of what you normally do, your system becomes pretty confused, and that results in being more vulnerable to illness and injury and making cognitive mistakes and not being able to sleep and just feeling low mood and low energy. And unfortunately, when you experience a level of circadian disruption that you did, it's going to take time, to recover. And I think a lot of folks, coming off of, travel, I think underappreciate how disciplined they need to be in these kind of circadian behaviors. So that's kind of one piece of it. And then the second piece is just really being patient through that process. And I think that that was the discussion with Nick and I, trying to get him back aligned around these circadian behaviors, to kind of try to accelerate his recovery. But yeah, it was interesting talking to like Glenn and Nick, and in terms of just how low their mood was and how hard it was actually to kind of get back to neutral and back to baseline.
I was, I don't know if depressed is the right word, but down, just really low down mood.
I mean, that was for 2 years. That was like your reason for being in a lot of ways. Like, I mean, it's just every day that was kind of your focus. And yeah, I mean, I think anytime you kind of finish a project like that, there is this, kind of letdown, which is, I think, really normal. Would you say that you're kind of back to your kind of back to neutral, or?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Okay,
I've been working with Kirk on
nice.
hormone optimization, because they did take our blood work, and I think they concluded that I have the testosterone of a 14-year-old teenage girl.
Okay, we want to fix that. Yeah,
it's okay. And then also working with John Wellborn on mobility and then strength. So we're about to launch a program where I'm going to try to get back to the health that I was in 2015 when I left the Tier 1 Command. And we'll see if it's possible. We're going to do it in Men's Journal. But again, with Antarctica, because there's no cellular whatsoever for the people that are listening, was it a black hole until we got back to South America, and then all of a sudden the data, or were you guys
actually through? Oh yeah, we collected data in our Antarctica. So what happens is basically for 3 days, how Whoop works is basically we'll collect data, even if you're not connected to Bluetooth, as long as Whoop is charged and on your wrist, it's collecting data for 3 days. So once you guys got back to, I got a Wi-Fi signal, all of the data from the strap gets pushed, and then it appears in the app, and then we can see it in the back end.
Okay. That's what I thought.
Yep. So the only kind of short period of downtime was in Abu Dhabi. We had just like a small patch of time that we didn't get, but we got the whole expedition.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. Interesting. I would have thought Egypt would have been comparable to that, but
Cairo we got on the 13th. We got all your data.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, Mike, just want to and thanks so much for all your time. We were saying it kind of off camera, we were talking about how to stay sharp well into your golden years. Love that article that you just published, and you brought in Stephen Kotler, who I'm just a huge fan of. But would love to just talk about longevity and mindset. I mean, I think the things that, we started this conversation talking about doing hard things, and I know Stephen has done work with, getting people who are in their late 50s and 60s, like doing something really hard, and how that actually changes your perspective on your own aging and your own kind of mindset around longevity. And I thought it was just like such a powerful article and reminder for everyone that, this connection between kind of doing hard things and just your mindset with regard to longevity.
So to set the context for the listeners, Nar Country is the name of the book by Stephen Kotler, and he's a 14-time New York Times bestseller.
Yeah.
Nar meaning like gnarly. So he taught himself at the age of, I believe he's 53, to park skiing. If you don't know what park skiing is, that's like the part of the mountain where they've got all the obstacles that you could do stunts off of. And to teach yourself to park ski at 53 is like unheard of. It's usually something that, young teenagers learn and continue on. And he specifically chose something so hard to prove that as you age, there's actual superpowers that you start to obtain or sharpen. One, life experience, emotional intelligence, the ability, because your body can't endure as much pain in the older years, you become more efficient in your movements and find more effective or expedient ways to pick something up. And he's right. And really what he's reframed it for me. I think human beings sometimes are like sheep, and it's like, the societal sort of, belief that, hey, as you get older, you can't teach old dogs new tricks. No, he's saying that's wrong. That's because people mindset-wise buy into that. Well, I'm 40, I can't teach myself to surf. No, you can't. You just have to be more effective and efficient and reflective about it. If you continue to fall, say, hey, that doesn't feel well. How do I change that? Because when you're a teenager, you just do it until you don't fall anymore. And so it was just, that really reframed it. And Rich DeVinny, who wrote the book, The Attributes, a teammate, joined me. I think everyone in their early 30s needs to read that book to actually expedite their learning and say, hey, like when you get over the hill, which is just a number, like learning doesn't stop. And I don't know why, as we get older, we're like, oh, well, I just want to retire. I never want to retire. That's like saying I'm thrown in the towel.
Totally.
I like learning and growth takes place. There's no better knows no finish line. There is no finish line. In excellence, if you define excellence, I came up with a definition. It's the commitment to continual improvement in learning, knowing that there's no definitive or end like finish line. And that's what Stephen reinforced for me, is that if you tap into these attributes that only come with age and wisdom, and you utilize those to your benefits, there's nothing you can't do in your 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And Jim Wigington, who has set more world records than anyone I've ever met, the 73-year-old that was on 777 with us, is a shining example of that. Yeah. Now, did he have a hernia during 777 and you didn't tell anyone about it? And I was pissed.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, but my goal now is to be Jim Wigington when I'm his age. And right now I'm far behind where he's at. So my message to anyone is, listen to the podcast. More importantly, pick up the book. But guys, we're not done at 40, 50, 60. And if you even look at I hate to take it to business, most billionaires don't become billionaires until their 50s or 60s. All right. So it takes a while to build to success in anything. And with this podcast, the Men's Journal Everyday Warrior podcast, I just had Renee Mauborgne on, who wrote the book Blue Ocean Strategy, which is like one of the top business strategy books in the world. I'm loving these conversations because it's like the Dunning-Kruger effect. As I have these experts in, I'm like, oh, there's so much I don't know. And my slope to enlightenment is going to go until 70, 80. And I'm going to get there and be like, oh, there's still so much I don't know, but hey, I give it my best shot.
I love it. Well, thanks for sharing that. This has been such a fun conversation. Where is the best place for folks to find you?
MikeSarraille.com. F my life for saying that. Eventually my media team is run by Michelle Ballesteros, who's just an all-star, and Will Sharman, who's an all-star, who you bet both of them. And the speaking bureaus are like, hey man, it's time. You got to start your own website. And I'm like, God
damn it. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for all your time today. I really appreciate it.
Kristen, good to see you again. Hope to work with you guys into the future. And we can't thank Whoop enough for all the support during 777 in helping with the media to help us raise again, you asked the question. Right now we're at $1.25 million raised for Folds of Honor. And we're not stopping there.
Thank you to Mike Sarraille for joining the podcast to talk about the incredible feats of the 777 team. Also, a big thank you to Mike for his service. If you enjoyed this episode of the Whoop Podcast, please leave us a rating or review. Please subscribe to the Whoop Podcast. Check us out on social at Whoop, at Will Ahmed. If you have a question you want to see answered on the podcast, email us podcast@whoop.com. Call us 508-443-4952. You can sign up for a free trial for Whoop at whoop.com. Literally, you get a free Whoop strap in the mail. Get to try it for 30 days and then decide whether you want to become a member. It's an unbelievable deal we've never done before. And that's a wrap, folks. Thank you all for listening. We'll catch you next week on the Whoop Podcast. As always, stay healthy and stay in the green.